Football made simple. Become great at your craft by finding ways to make it simple for those around you. This is the Coaching 101 podcast hosted by Find a Way Productions with your co-host Daniel Chamberlain and Kenny Simpson. What's up, coaches? This is the Coaching 101 podcast. I'm Daniel Chamberlain, co-host. I'm here with Coach Simpson. Coach, how are things it's football season in Arkansas, right?
It is. We're not quite to the games that matter a ton, but we're finally getting to hit other people. So that's always a blessing. And hopefully you're going to get out of the heat. If you're down here in the South, the first month or two of football, a lot of times it's not about who's the best team. It's just who's in the best shape or who has the most guys that can play, because the third or fourth quarter, a lot of times it's just a battle of attrition.
Yeah, it always seems like that's where you get your key injuries, your cramps, it's always the kids that can't quite go 4 quarters yet, and you're really leaning on them, or it's a blowout and you don't need them. I don't know. But kids kind of get reminded real quick what 100% exertion is through in the, some heat of summer.
Yeah, it's just one of the deals where, early season games are different for each program. Not very long ago, we were in a place where we needed to win those games for confidence. Our program had been struggling, so you needed to win those games. And so for some programs, this time of year is a lot more important than probably for established programs. You're probably at the point where you're trying new things, and that's where we are. We use our non-conference games to kind of see what works and what doesn't work. And so we're hoping to peak, obviously, later in the year. But if you're a guy who's listening to this, you might be saying, we know that we get in those games, we don't have much of a chance to win. So we need to try to get some of these ones early. So everybody's kind of in a different frame of mind early in the year, and the excitement of everybody's undefeated has worn off, because now when you play the first game, it's 50-50.
Right.
You're either 1-0 or you're 0-1. And so how you respond from that's going to be key. So I'm curious to see, for our personal team, how we handle this. It's a long year, but I'm sure for you too, you're in a new job, how you guys are going to handle. You're in a more established program, so kind of a different perspective for you, I would think, than what you're used to.
It's going to be very, very strange for me. All the way around, the program with so much help, so I'm not having to do as much, but it's just strange. It's a very strange feeling to come from starting at a 1A football team, and then, 5 years later, I'm at a 6A football team. That is just, they're uncomparable. It's not even the same sport almost.
It's different. A lot of people ask me that when I went from, I moved up, I was coaching 6A just a little bit ago, and doing 4 and 5A here. And, and a lot of times what's the difference? When you get to a higher level of football, it's not that the game is any different really, but there's so many other moving pieces. For the first time, you might see people are matching personnel, or they actually have personnel groups. At the 1A, 2A, 3A level, the guys that are your best guys are already on the field. So there's not much of a need to have a nickel defense, or anything like that. So
right.
That's a huge difference. And I know we notice, and the special teams game is a whole new world at that level. And then if you're a head coach, if the higher the level you go, sometimes the less coaching you get to do, because you're really mainly working with the guys you're in charge of. But one misconception you'll find out real quickly is I always thought like coaches at that level were just naturally smarter. And I don't know if that's actually true. I'm not saying that they're not smarter, but I am saying a 1A, 2A, 3A coach, he's got to know how to coach every position. He's going to see a different offense every week, it feels like. And so those guys usually are extremely prepared coming out of small school ball. When you get to higher level football, it's basically spread and 3-4. And that's kind of what everyone runs, a version of spread and 3-4. And so when you see the oddball, a lot of those guys really struggle with it. If you've only coached big ball, big level football your whole life, you're going to struggle with how to fit these wing T, flex bone type offenses, because they're so different.
Right. Yeah, it's Yeah, I guess something I've seen is like football gets made more complex there because you have lifelong professionals that are in a coordinator role, or they just coach wide receivers, they just coach quarterbacks, but they've got as many years in the game as, small school head coaches will ever dream of.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree. There's just as many coaches getting brought along there as there are on the small school level, right? Like there's some guys that just don't know football yet. They're learning the ropes. They just get to do it a huge program, and I'm not sure that it's any better or worse. Like you said, there's probably people on staff, and I've not got to spend enough time around them, unfortunately, but there's probably some of them that don't know the dimensions of the football field because they haven't had to paint it or what lines go where, because it's either turf or a staff does it for, another crew does it for them. So you it, just putting in that work at a small school, I think, is by far worth it, and it does make a critical thinker of you, if nothing else, and the ability to work overall football coach, like you said, every position. You might be the defensive coordinator and multiple position coaches. So, yeah, there's something to it. That is like the spread, 100%. Every defense has to be complex because that offensive coordinator is just sitting down with a pen and paper every day and looking at ways to make you look bad. So, it's the defense ends up being more complex to match the offense. But
Yeah, guys that are listening to this, if you're, I don't know what you're watching on, if you're watching on YouTube or on whatever, whatever you're listening to it on, but if you're on YouTube, leave us a comment because I always am curious, like the guys that listen, is it mainly small school guys, big school guys, where you're from? Daniel and I would love to connect. We like doing this, but we'd love to connect with who's listening and maybe be able to make sure we do a couple episodes that will maybe tailor towards what you would want to hear.
yeah, but we've taken many a piece of advice already, and once for that why coaches get fired episode did pretty well. A lot of people really liked that episode, and it was straight from a listener who said, "Hey, what about this?" So,
Yeah.
what Coach is saying is great. Well, we didn't really come here to talk about our new teams or my new team, and you're the team that you've been leading to victory for years. We came to talk about some RPO football, which I think is going to be a blast. It's the newest piece of the game that I'm not 100% comfortable in yet. I understand the fundamentals, don't always know how to use it the best, so I'm going to be learning a ton tonight. And of course, you've developed an entire offense based on this, so that's going to be, I've gone to your clinics and seen how you use it, and I'm always just amazed every year. So I'm pretty pumped to hear you get to talk on that, Coach.
Yeah, I'm excited, man. RPO's here to stay. It's not going anywhere. And I think just this offseason, I got to do Huddle does a big kind of virtual clinic, and they allowed me to come in. And it was really cool because I wish it had been a live event because I was sandwiched between two NFL coaches. And one was Mike McDaniels, who I would have just fanboyed all over. And I've been around him. I'd have probably got a picture with him. Instead, it was virtual, and I never even got to meet him. So it's kind of disappointing, but it was cool to get to be talking with those guys and seeing some of the stuff we do at the high school level being run at the professional level. Of course, they've got a couple more tools. I don't look the same from Tua to Tyreek Hill, but the idea and the concept can be very similar.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, before we get started, Coach, why don't you tell us some ways to make football coaching simpler for coaches and football simpler for players?
Sure. Find a Way Productions sponsors the Coaching 101 podcast. It also sponsors fbcoachsimpson.com. You can find all things football, I think 31 or 32 materials as far as books, printed materials, multiple digital materials there, a lot of downloadable things you could use for the season. So there's RPO stuff like we're going to talk about tonight, but there's also basically any material you can think of. We've tried to put on that website where you can either download it and get it instantly, or if it's a book, get it shipped to you, or there are some courses on there as well. All things football over at fbcoachsimpson.com. We also sponsor offensivecoordinatoracademy.com, all things offense. So the full academy, still having guys going through that all the time. It's a really good resource because you can go there at any time you want, cherry pick the different courses you want to go through. You can get the different materials you want, like the offensive coordinator workbook. We have a new offensive coordinator weekly planner, which is a really good material for an offensive coordinator. If you're listening to this and you're an OC, that material is something I personally use. It helps me script plays, organize my practice, all that kind of stuff. Over at offensivecoordinatoracademy.com. You can also go to defensivecoordinatoracademy.com, the same thing, but on the other side of the ball. Tonight we're talking offense. If you're a defensive coordinator, you can get into the academy, go through all the different courses you want at your own pace. You can also get the different books, the workbook, the planner. We even have a defensive line workbook. So there's a lot of materials over there at defensivecoordinatoracademy.com.
Awesome. Quickly throw in Adaptable PT. That's the physical therapy clinic that my wife and I have started. We're finally making some progress, man. It's been great. Just watching it kind of come fruition. My wife was not liking it so much there for a couple months. You know, you got to get things started sometimes, and when you're the new industry in town, people aren't just jumping over to come see what you're doing. So things are taking off though. We're balancing out. She's still there doing one-on-one care. That's kind of her big thing, is this PT 2.0. Very fitness forward approach. She likes to put people under a squat bar and make them get to work. And she just constantly talks about, you know, your rehab has to be harder than what your everyday life is. If your rehab is lighter work than your everyday life, you're never going to see the rehab have much of an effect. So she's very fitness forward in the way that kind of like what I do. I like to podcast. I like to learn. I coach other coaches. She does the same thing in the PT world. She travels all over the nation to teach PTs how to do their job, which I've commended her for many, many times. She's on the state board of PTs here for Oklahoma. So she's got it going on. She knows what she's doing. She's serving people there in Grove, Oklahoma. It's well worth the drive anywhere you're from, probably. But especially her concussion studies, geriatrics is where she kind of sunk her teeth into the business. So if you've got either of those, come on in. But just anything with kids, you know, we're getting into season now. You're going to start seeing those injuries. You know, she's helping people get back a lot faster from some injuries than that other PTs or doctors may shut you down for a lot longer. So it's worth coming and giving her a look anyway. That's Adaptable PT in Grove. You can see us at Adaptable PT on Twitter, and then email us at adaptablept@gmail.com. Last little bit here, Athletic Speed and Movement over at athleticspeedandmovement.com. That's where Joe Daniel and I have taken Del Basquet's 45 years of knowledge. And he's been working with NFL. He was the very first speed coach in the NFL. He was doing it when no one knew. Everyone just said you can't coach speed. And unfortunately, that's still, people say it today. But he's got a 12-week program that we're selling, and you're going to see speed improvements immediately. If you do it for a week, your kids are going to get a little faster. If you do the full 12 weeks, your kids are going to get a lot faster. We just really focus on teaching kids how to run. And it teaches you as a coach how to manage that training. So you're not eating up too much of your practice time, but you don't have to add on more practice time. So great program. You're going to see improvements at any level. It doesn't matter if you're a youth coach, if you're a semi-pro, anything in between. I got to have a good conversation with Ron Roberts, the defensive coordinator there at Auburn. And he was telling me about how much he loved the program. And he's been using it for years. Not currently at Auburn. He said he's not the head coach. He doesn't get to make that decision. But he said it's the very first thing he's going to reinstall when he eventually takes a head coaching gig somewhere. But he's been using it for many, many years. So it's a pretty high name, high profile people love the program. And now we have it to sell to you as a coach. So jump on over to athleticspeedmovement.com. Jump onto that 12-week program today. All right. All the bills are paid here. So question number one, let's just discuss what is an RPO.
Okay. Well, there's a couple of different ways when you hear RPO, and I'm not going to just give it just complete history here, but I do want to go through enough to give some depth to the subject. So let's go back to I always go back to Rich Rodriguez back when he was at West Virginia. Of course, he coached at Arizona for a long time, but he was the first guy that really kind of made it popular to run the zone read. They were running inside zone and outside zone, and he started having these real athletic quarterbacks who could read a backside player to pull it and run it. And then you started to see guys like Noel Mazzoni come along the scene. And we actually have him in the Offensive Coordinator Academy. If you want to go listen to him, he does a great job talking about how he was, to me, one of the pioneers of the RPO movement, where he started putting packaged plays together, where we have a run play called, and we have this screen going on over here, or maybe even an attached kind of route that goes with this. So to me, you had those are two guys I really look at as kind of pioneers of this movement. You see it to me, the RPO really kind of worked from the bottom up. Like a lot of things you watch in the NFL, and then as a coach, you want to put them in. But I think the RPO actually started like at the high school level because there's a lot of option type football. That's the mindset of it. And it kind of worked up from high school into, and Gus Malzahn be another guy you kind of put in that bucket where you're saying RPOs. But it worked up to the collegiate level where it became extremely popular. And then now it's worked up to the NFL level where you're seeing pretty much every NFL team now has an RPO game. So let's walk through what types of RPOs you can have. So you can have what I call RROs, or run options, like that first one I just mentioned, where the quarterback is going to take the snap and he's going to read a defender, what we call post snap. All that means is after the ball has been snapped, is not, he has to read it. You're not telling him what to do. He's going to read a defender to either give the ball to the running back or to pull it and to run it. So we would call that like an RRO, run option. So it's not really a true RPO, but it's kind of in the same family, like a distant cousin. It's still in that family. Then you have what I call detached plays. These have been around the NFL for a long time. Basically where you have a run and then the receivers are doing something that's completely divorced or to the side, not really together. And the quarterback has the option before the ball is snapped. Do I take the pass or do I stay with the run? That's been around for a long, long time, but it's become extremely popular, and it's probably the first type of RPO a coach will put in. So a really common one of these might be some kind of inside run with maybe a bubble screen or a fast screen or some kind of screen to the other side. Sometimes if you have double twins, or you're basically in an ace type set with twins on a 2x2, you might have a screen on both sides. You might have a bubble screen on one side and a fast screen on the other side. And either the coach tells the quarterback before it's snapped through a signal to take one of the throws, or maybe you've taught the quarterback, we're looking for either numbers. If we have 2-on-1, we're going to take the screen, or you might have taught them leverage. If the corner is playing off or the outside linebacker is playing way inside, take the screen. But either way, that would be, to me, that is a pre-snap decision. So the quarterback has made the decision before the ball is even snapped. So both of those, I don't know if you would technically call an RPO, but a lot of coaches kind of put them in that family. So you have the run read and you have the screen. A true RPO would be reading a defender after the ball is snapped and running a receiver into that voided area. So that the most common one, teams are what we call glance routes, or I call it a peak route, or some people call it like a slant route, or like the Miami Dolphins now are running dig routes because their receivers are really fast, so they can push up and run a dig. And so they're going to run the route behind the defender that the quarterback is reading. So let's say, and you could run it depending on what you're trying to do offensively. You could run it to the play side, or you could run it to the back side. So that's dependent on your structure. If you run the gun T, we only read backside guys for the RPO. We usually use play action for the play side guys because of the fact that we have a tight end wing. But a lot of spread teams, like 10 personnel spread teams, they'll run a play side RPO where they'll bring a receiver on like a slant route and maybe read the safety, which is a chance of a big play. If he comes down, we're going to throw the post. Okay. Or you might run, like I mentioned, like a little dig route or an in breaking route and read those inside the box players. If they come in, we throw behind them. Then the more expensive ones, if you want to watch a really good RPO game, go watch the Miami Dolphins last year. The Chiefs have a really good RPO game. The Eagles have a really good RPO game. So all three of those teams would be good teams to go watch. You're a Cowboy fan, so you know the Eagles have a very good RPO game. It's hard to stop. Okay,
shots fired.
Yeah, well, I'm just saying it's hard to stop if it's done right. That's kind of why a lot of people are going to, especially older coaches or defensive guys, are not a big fan of the RPO game because it is almost like cheating. You're giving a true run with the ability to throw it. So you watch the Dolphins now, they'll actually run where Tua will read two defenders, where they'll run like basically a flat dig route or a flat curl route with a run attached. And depending on what he's reading, he can hand the ball off if he gets a certain look. If the linebacker comes to play the run, he can pull it. If somebody else drops under the dig route, which teams are starting to do now because defenses are going to adjust. So they're going to put a guy, they're going to give you kind of a false read. So when he's trying to throw that little dig route, if somebody drops into that zone, then they're going to throw the flat route. So you're seeing quarterbacks at his level, of course, as an NFL quarterback, and one of the best in the NFL, I think, are reading RPOs, where now they're giving him almost two reads on run options, which is why when you watch the Dolphins play a lot of games, we have one of the lowest run per game ratio because they've built in so many of these RPOs. They really want Tua to pull it. And I know we're going to get on this in the next segment, but when you're putting in RPOs, you need to be thinking about, do you want to pull it more, or are you just putting these in to kind of protect yourself and you really just want to run the football? There's nothing wrong with either approach, but as we kind of delve farther in this episode into this, it does matter when you're structuring things. So that was a very long-winded answer, but hopefully you got enough there on RPO game to at least be dangerous.
No, it makes sense. And, probably the most introductory, I guess where I learned it was just the backside play, whether it's a slant. I know a lot of people use the screen. I'm not a huge fan of screens. I don't, maybe I've just never been taught how to use them right. I just seen a lot of them get blown up and now you're losing 3 yards instead of, you could have just thrown a slant or whatever. And some people don't like slants because you're just running a little skinny kid in there with all the linebackers, all the beef. So I got you either way, but, just that the backside, the quarterback's already turning his hips for the ride, and so he might as well read the guy that's going to stand there anyway and just make him wrong, and pull it and toss it if you can. As I kind of delve deeper into RPOs, trying to learn more, I ran on Brent Dearman from, I think he's at Northern Alabama University now as the head coach over there. And, I love what he does with it. He's got 3 reads on every play and all he's running is inside zone, right? And he's got 3 different passes he can throw right now. So it's fun to watch it go from so simple. We talked to Lynn Shackelford a year ago or so. He won several state championships in a row up at Cashin in Oklahoma. And his was like, my O-line sucked. They couldn't get to the second level. I could not teach them to block a linebacker on zone run. So we said, screw it, we'll just read them, right? So his was a play side thing. Like, if my tight end and tackle can't climb to figure out who's supposed to climb to a linebacker, I'll just throw the ball over there. Right. And so it's cool to see things start so simple and just problem solving to now we're like, hey, actually, let's make this the problem that has to be solved. And so you walk into things like Brent Dearman where he's got 3 passes on every play and he can run the ball in that same play. So it's really neat to watch that kind of open up. Right. So yeah, RPOs can be very simple. They can be very complex. You talked about having 2 or 3 reads in the NFL. I've seen that in college. A read makes you pull it or not. So you got a zone read built into immediately read an outside linebacker. Did he run with someone or sit down? And then if he ran off, you read a corner. And is he giving you man eyes or zone eyes, right? And now you might just be a quarterback that started with a zone read and you're sprinting up the sidelines for 100 or whatever, or you're hitting it out there on some guy thinks he's in man coverage and your dude shuts it down at 15 and you're getting those yards. So it's pretty neat to see how complex they've become. So we'll talk about installing them. So we discussed you've been running these, and I really want to learn where you started and how you started building that offense out. But that decision to use them, sometimes it's forced on you. Sometimes you just can't do anything else. In Stillwell last year, we ran the gun tee, a version of it. We had a little more spread because that's how you do, right? You buy a package and then you have to hybridize it to coach what you know on top of the thing you just bought. So, but we love the RPO and we started trying to attach it to every single thing. And I know that's not the answer for everybody. Sometimes it's just find one play that this often opens up a backside seam and just throw the ball out there. So let's talk about a little bit how to install these RPOs, Coach.
Yeah. Well, let's talk first. You kind of have to figure out what's your goal in them? And I know we're going to hit that a little bit later on too in this episode, but what are you trying to accomplish? Are you wanting to throw the ball? And so are you wanting to run the ball? Are you putting this in as a small thing to protect what you're doing? I would say that if you're some version of shotgun, so whatever that flavor is for you, I don't like to put them all in a box and call them spread, because you could be running really 20, like I run 21 personnel. I know we're in the gun, but we're very much a run heavy team. But if you're in the shotgun, the huge advantage to that is the RPO game. So you're obviously listening to this episode, so it's probably something that's on your mind. But I would say you're really doing yourself a massive disservice if your offense is based out of the gun and you're not running some kind of RPO game. You're going to be very predictable if that's the case, because play action in the gun is really tough to run. So the RPO game kind of has served in that purpose. So first thing you've got to do is you got to figure out verbiage. So you need to figure out, who are we going to read? Are we going to read backside inside linebackers? And what is our word that's going to tell our team that's what we're doing? So like if we're going to read backside inside linebacker, maybe we're going to call that glance. Okay. And I'm just making this up. You call it whatever you want to call it in your offense. Obviously, if you want to run the gun tee, we've got all the verbiage done for you. Just go to FB Coach Simpson. You can get it. It's already done. But if you're trying to work this through for yourself, you'll come up with a word that's telling us we're reading this inside linebacker on the backside. And so we want to teach that as a full concept to our whole offense, especially our skill guys that might potentially be running the glance route or that route. So then we want to be able to tag who runs the route. So we might want to run it with our inside player, and we just call it, say we're calling outside zone, or for me, we're calling buck.
Right.
Calling buck sweep with a glance. If we call that, they know the inside guy runs the glance route. Like it's just a built-in, is what we do. But I can tag different guys to run that route as long as they all know that's where they have to get. So when we install it, we teach, this is what whoever's called for the route has got to get behind this linebacker. And that's as simple as we teach it. It's pretty easy. And then our kids all learn, okay, so if coach calls glance and he tags me, I've got to get back there. But if he hasn't tagged me, I just run what I always do on this play. And so you want to make sure you're attaching that. The same thing with maybe a read for the quarterback. You've got to be able to figure out how to get his eyes on certain guys. And is it going to affect your O-line blocking? So in my offense, we actually have another verb we've got to put in there that tells our quick tackle, we don't want you to gap protect and lock onto the D end. Like we do that all the time, but we need another word that's going to tell you don't lock onto him because we're going to read him. And so you have to come up with that as a coach. What's your verb for that? And that's going to involve the quarterback, and whichever tackle you have involved, you're going to take, because it's going to change his rule, where instead of you gap protecting, now you're going to go block outside. So we know we're reading this guy. And again, depending on how deep you want to go in this world, you need words that talk to all the different people you want to read. Okay, so that could be, that's up to you. That could be 11 different words if you were going to try to read every single person on the defense. For us, at the high school level, we usually have about 3 or 4 words that let us know these are the 3 or 4 guys we're going to read. And we want all our kids to know that. Okay, so that's the first thing you got to do is verbiage. Second thing you got to do is how you're going to teach your quarterback. The quarterback, how are we going to teach him? The words you use to your quarterback matter a lot, and where his eyes go matter a ton. The beautiful part about RPOs is you should be able to put his eyes on one defender. So that's how we teach everything. This is all based off of this defender. So you put your eyes on this defender, and if he does X, you do Y. So it's very much an if-then process. It's really simple. However, you've got to be clear with him what to do when it's not so clear. So that's going to be that, okay, this defender really kind of halfway does this. What do I do now? And so a lot of that is how you teach him. Are you teaching him, we want you to pull the ball more often? So if you're unsure, we want you to pull it, make a play because you're our best player. So we have that guy on my team this year. He's really talented. If he thinks he can pull it, he has the green light to pull it. Okay. However, there's been years where we don't really want him to pull it because our running back's our best player, or he's unsure and he's young, or whatever it is. So we would teach him, if it's cloudy or you're unsure, give to live. Kind of give him that nice statement that just lets him know, if you're unsure, hand the ball off. Okay. And so how you talk to him matters, and how you teach him what to do with his footwork matters as well, because sometimes those are hard throws. It's really hard for a left-handed quarterback to throw a glance route to the left. It's really hard for a right-handed quarterback to throw a glance route to the right, because they have to run the mesh, completely reset their feet, and then put a ball on a guy who's running, a decent speed in a short time, and about that quick. All right. So there might be times where you have to tell your quarterback, hey, we're only going to have you throw the glance routes to the right side of the field or the left side of the field, or we're going to have you work on, Daniel kind of mentioned, if you have those 2 or 3 options, can that kid handle that? Can your kid handle, read this guy, okay, then also read that guy? Or did you put too much on him and now he's just going to freeze up on you and start guessing? So kind of our threshold for what a quarterback can handle is when you see he's starting to guess, he can't handle it. And so we're going to try to put a lot of RPOs in, and we'll play with different things. But the minute you start noticing he's guessing, that's because it's overwhelming him just a bit. The game's moving a little too fast for him to run that specific RPO. So a lot of times that's kind of what we're deciding with our quarterbacks. Where do your eyes go? What words are we going to put in? How many things can he read? Can he go 1, 2, 3? Can he just go 1? Some years, maybe he can only run the automatic type things. And then the final thing is we try to build in automatics. So we try to teach our kids, if we run the ball to the right and you're a receiver to the left, this is our rules, like basketball rules. If there's one guy, we're going to run an option route. You're going to run a hitch or a go, whatever you decide. It can be on whatever you want.
Right.
If there's 2 guys or more, we're going to run this screen. And so you have these automatics that are built in, so you don't have to always call the full play, the automatic, the RPO, and you get real wordy doing that stuff. But if you teach the automatics, like for our offense, if I just called buck, and depending on what formation we're in, we know we're going to run buck. Let's say we're in strong right. So we're going to run buck to the right. And we know our receivers, if there's 2 of them to the left, have an automatic screen on. That was taught day 1. I don't have to call that. So all the words you hear from us would be strong right buck. That's it. So the quarterback knows we have the bubble screen option, okay, or we can hand the ball off. If I want to add an RPO, we can go, right, strong right, buck, peak. And now I'm bringing a guy into that window and we're reading the peak. If I want to change the guy running the peak, we tag the receiver. So you could go strong right, buck, Y peak. And now the Y knows I'm running the peak, not that guy. So the other receivers just revert back to what are their automatics? They run their automatics, which if you've done a good job building it in, quarterback, again, all he has to know is who am I looking at and what is my read on that? If he does X, I do Y. So those are kind of the 3 things I think you've got to do when you're installing them. Figure out verbiage that everyone can understand. Figure out how you're going to teach your quarterback. And then figure out what kind of automatics you're going to have so that you're not having to put a ton of words in your playbook all the time. Because one of the things about the RPO is you want it to kind of be simple. You don't want it to be super exotic. Because if you do it right, this is a system that a quarterback can run and read one defensive player, which should be a really easy read for a quarterback. So don't make it hard by putting a lot of words in there.
I think the only, like, where my brain starts going with RPOs is what problem am I solving? Because if you're getting 8 yards of play in the run game anyway, maybe you don't have to worry about that. But if you've got a year that you can't pass the ball traditionally because you've got a bad left tackle or something, to me, that seems like a great way to just take the fear away from the O lineman, who obviously knows he can't do his job well, and then make the pass game kind of come to you. Because maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, right? I mean, you can't make the defender move his feet. But if I can freeze him, and that's kind of going to bump into our next point here, and we're going to talk about setting up your run and pass game with RPOs. But if I can just freeze him and then help my front guy just have one less defender on the front side, then that's great.
Mhm.
I like what you talked about. Why peak? That's something we put in just on a whim, just trying to get an extra guy a catch because the hole was there. I mean, we probably didn't run Buck as there's no probably. We did not run Buck as cleanly as you do. I'm pretty sure in like week 8 we were still trying to teach our strong tackle and guard what their aiming points were because they just couldn't get it down, whatever that issue is. But we continuously saw a hole, and so we sent a guy there to go fill that void and then throw him the football and just make really long handoffs all night long, right? So I think you need to figure out what problem you have. What are you actually trying to solve? Because just adding extra fluff in there for no reason, like you said, you're going to push that. Someone is going to run out of RAM. They're no longer going to be able to operate at full speed because you've slowed them down with all of your chaoticness. It looks great on paper, but that doesn't mean they can remember all that stuff on Friday night when they're gassed, when they're in a tight game, or maybe they've gotten down a little bit and now they're hanging their head and now they can't remember all that stuff you taught them. So I would say figure out what the problem is, solve that problem, and then build from there. I don't know. I really want to. I love all the running stuff you do as well, right? With the gun tee, you've got, and I don't even know what you call it anymore because unfortunately I bailed on the offense when I started trying to learn all this new defensive stuff. But when you start reading down linemen with a quarterback to determine if he's going to run the ball or maybe pass, or just, man, all that stuff. Just, I love how you can get so chaotic with very few words. Change the formation, keep the same read on, read a whole new guy because they've switched people. So I love all of that. It's such a fun system to play around in. So that will push us on to how to use RPOs to open up your run and pass game. So run game, I feel like, is pretty simple. If I continue throwing the ball behind a outside or maybe even a very wide inside linebacker, he's going to quit filling holes very quickly, and he's going to sit there because his coach is going to yell at him. His defensive coordinator or his linebackers coach or someone is going to yell at him for, why are you evacuating that area so fast, right? And when I can get him to either not come because his coach told him not to, or feel like he's doing the wrong thing no matter what, because either we're throwing the ball and he's getting yelled at, or we're running the ball well and he's getting yelled at, that's a pretty good place to be on the offensive side, right? And I really feel like that sets up the run, because the first thing he's going to do is quit filling. And now you don't run a bunch of stuff with Buck. I really like the inside zone look with this, because now I can pick a guy and freeze his feet, and that running back knows that lane may be there, and he can, he still makes his normal reads. But if he hits a cutback and I froze a dude in space, hopefully my dude can make things happen.
Yeah, no, I mean, you got to kind of think of, so basically you're asking me like run game and pass game benefits. So to me, run game wise, you kind of hit the nail on the head. I mean, you're solving problems. If you're running RPOs, it should be to solve problems, not otherwise just call play action passes. But if you want a true RPO should be done to solve an issue. So, that could be an inside linebacker, which is a very common one. A lot of times one of the hardest guys to get blocked on any run play is the backside inside linebacker. He's really hard to get blocked just because you're either double teaming to him if you're running zone like you guys are doing, or we're trying to wrap a guard to him, which both those can be difficult blocks. Okay, so because of that, that's probably a day one RPO a lot of people are putting in, is how do I solve that problem? You mentioned it could be an outside linebacker. For us, it could be defensive linemen. So we're going to do some things where, hey, we pull guards a lot, which I think makes the RPOs really pop, because you give guard flow, and if they want to key guard or follow guards or whatever, it just creates a lot of room in the RPO world. But it also creates issues, for the offense. If we're going to pull a guard, we're leaving a gap there. So we're going to have to figure out ways to read those guys if they become problems. So that's the simple answer in the run game, is you're solving problems by pulling it and making those guys, like you mentioned, freeze or slow down or not do what they're coached to do. Where it gets extremely dangerous in the passing game is, how are they covering the void for the guy who left in the run game. So let's say we throw the glance route. We're throwing it off the inside linebacker. So now that inside linebacker is gone, as a defensive coordinator, you've got to decide who's coming into that void to cover that. Well, the most obvious player to have do that is probably the safety. He's the next guy there. So we're going to drop him down to take away these glance routes, slant routes, whatever. And so that's the defense. So now the next move is an OC. You see that. Okay, if the safety's coming down and robbing number 2 on the glance route, if we ran dig post, it should be a touchdown. And so you're creating these explosive kind of play action passes, and we build those in off of, like for us, we could call that glance special. So now we know it looks like we're throwing glance, but we're really pumping that thing and bringing the X receiver on the post route. Okay. Or maybe you're running bubble screens off of everything and the corner's jumping it. So we're going to go ahead and run like bubble special or like a fox route where you're going to fake blocking and run up the sideline. So you're creating these, these explosive big plays because you're forcing the defense to start getting involved with the DBs nearer to the line of scrimmage. They're having to come up to take away some of these bubbles that are in the defense, whether it's a bubble screen, a glance route, a dig route, whatever. They're having to pull guys to cover that area where that linebacker was supposed to cover. Now he's gone because he's got to play the run. So now you're taking advantage of it in the run game. Or if they're going to bring a safety down, you can take advantage of it with this really nice big shot play touchdown. So it's kind of creating both of them if you can be effective at it, because the stress it puts on as a DC. And you can imagine, Daniel, you're on the defensive side of the ball now. So you're a DB. If we throw glance route, glance route, glance route, you only have 2 options. You have to keep the inside linebacker home and let us run the ball down your throat, hopefully. Or if you're going to say he's got to go fit run, you got to figure out a way to bring a DB into that spot. And then hopefully as an offense, we have the next play to kind of take advantage of a DB rolling into the box. How are we going to take advantage of that?
Yeah. I'm pretty certain that football is just wired for offensive these days. Like the rules, you talked earlier in the podcast about, defensive coaches hate RPOs because they are illegal. It's a run play. It's obviously a run play. And then linemen are 3 yards downfield and here comes the ball. So, yes, it's wild what you can do when you start picking on one position. And I mean, what does a coach do? You start putting in a sub, now you're not got your best 11 on the field, and you can quickly make your opponent deteriorate their defense trying to answer your very simple question. How are you going to stop this play?
Well, and what you're starting to see now is defensive coordinators are reverting to a lot more man. That's what we see. We see a lot more man or man free or whatever. Then as an offensive coordinator, what's your next move? And so you kind of have to have that, what's your next move? Because that's the obvious answer to me would be they're going to lock you up in man, take away the RPOs and fit the run with their box guys. And so as an OC, you're going to have those, okay, what's our next answer? For me, that's where we start running a whole bunch of motions. If you watch the Miami Dolphins play, they run a motion like every single play. And that's because they're trying to make it really hard to play man-to-man on them and still have their RPO game kind of available to them.
Yeah. I know the biggest things I've heard this offseason is running man or just very, very patient linebackers. And you start teaching patience. And if you've got a dude at that position, he can do that, right? He can sit still. He can wait for your quarterback to make a wrong read, and he can come fill because he knows what he's going to do. But most of us do not have that dude at every linebacker position. And so you start teaching patience. And then now, instead of averaging 3 yards a run, we're going to average 4.5. And then that's where you get into trouble, right? And you're still going to be wrong sometimes. So you're still going to give up the big shot play every 8 attempts or whatever. So it can snowball pretty quickly. All right. So we've talked about, what they are and how to install them and how to use them to open up your run and pass game. So there's the conversation today. So a peek behind the curtain. It is August the 6th. We've not recorded for a few weeks because I went away to some Army training man, I've been in Washington for a couple weeks, but all I've heard for the last 2 to 3 weeks is about running backs not getting paid in the NFL.
Mm.
And they've started using this. We'll just basically pay him the rookie contract and send him out the door. The next guy is going to be fresher. He's going to, he may not have the every key thing that we wanted about that running back, but there's always another running back in the waiting, right? And so I've been listening to that news, and it stinks. It stinks when they can isolate any position and go, you're not that useful, and it's not worth the risk. But that's exactly what's happened, right? We special teams guys are like, hey, wait a minute, you've not been paying us this whole time. We didn't whine about it too much,
Mm-hmm.
So now running backs are the new kickers, apparently.
Yeah, I saw an article that said punters and kickers are averaging more, or kickers maybe. I think it was kickers are averaging more for their contract than a running back is on average.
Yep. And I think you want, and we could talk this for another hour. I think a seasoned kicker brings a lot to the game.
Mm-hmm.
A seasoned running back brings fatigue and injury, and oh man, so you just hate to see it. Like, I hate seeing Saquon Barkley, and you're like, is he going to stay in the game or not? And they're just not going to pay, unfortunately. But that kind of got the wheels spinning. So I thought tonight we would do a top 10 list of running backs of all time. And I tried to throw in college players, but what I've come to find out is like, that is a position that they don't burn out in college. It seems like they all go to the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
There's some decent quarterbacks that were great in college and either didn't make the jump or fizzled. But man, it seems like the running backs, they're pretty on point. If they were good in college, they're going to be good at the next level. So essentially, this is a top 10 list of NFL running backs, although we tried to include all levels in there. So, Coach, if you want to get started, I'll let you read your side first, and then I'll just I'll throw up my options.
Okay. Well, first of all, let's talk about Saquon Barkley before I get into this. If he could make that quarterback for the Giants look good, the Giants should pay him whatever dime he wants, because that guy is not very good without Saquon Barkley. Sorry, Daniel Jones. Okay. Now we'll talk about the running backs. So I've got a couple honorable mentions. I see you do too, Daniel. So I'll go through my guys that didn't quite make the top 10. Be pretty quick on this. So I have Bo Jackson right outside the top 10. Obviously, I think if he doesn't get injured, he clearly is a top 10 running back, one of the best athletes of all time. Had he made it through a couple more years in the NFL, I think he's easily in the top 10. But I couldn't put him up there just because of injuries. My homer pick was Larry Zonka. I couldn't quite put him in the top 10, but when you think of big bruising running backs, he's got to be one of the guys you think of, a guy who has 2 Super Bowl rings, one of the best of all time, in my opinion. Got 2 or 3 other guys on here. I got Curtis Martin, played a long time for the Jets. Great undervalued running back, never gets his credit. Not quite top 10, but he's close. You got Adrian Peterson, another guy who I think at the height, when he was white hot, easily talent-wise top 10. Just didn't quite have as long a career as I would have liked to have seen. Probably would be 11 for me. Like if I was actually ranking him, he'd have been the next one to get on. I got John Riggins, another one, kind of that Larry Zonka mindset of those bruising running backs. Not quite top 10, but great running back. I've got Marcus Allen as another one of those guys that no one pays attention to. Then you look at his stats and you go, man, he was really good. It's too bad he had to play for the Raiders. So if he had played for whoever, might get on there. And my other homer pick would be Mike Allstott, because there for about 3 or 4 years, he was the best. And I actually got to meet him. I shook his hand once. I was a teenager in Florida. That man was a giant. And so those are my didn't quite make it list guys. All right. Here are my guys that made it. We'll start with number 10. I went with Marshall Faulk. I thought he easily could move up the list on this. I might have undervalued him on this, but the greatest show on turf. He played for it was the Colts and the Rams. Was unbelievable as far as being the first that I can really think of, one of the first guys that could catch it and could run it. And you kind of saw the evolution of the running back. Him and another guy on my list here. What now you want a running backs that can catch the ball as much as they can run it. Number 9 for me was O.J. Simpson, not just because of his last name, but probably one of the best running backs of all time. Of course, after he retired, had some off the field really bad issues that make a lot of people scared to acknowledge that. But back in the day, man, he was the best in the game for a long time. And still, I think you look back, one of the best of all time. I've got number 8, Earl Campbell. And you can kind of tell what kind of running backs I like. Those big running backs that can just withstand the pounding of it. Earl Campbell, unbelievable. Was it Earl Campbell who, when they were doing the conditioning for a mile, he didn't pass or something like that, and the coach said, "Well, if it's third and a mile, we won't hand the ball off to Earl Campbell." That's one of my favorite stories. I think it was him, but anyway, great running back. Number 7 for me, Eric Dickerson. I think was he the first guy that ran for 2,000 yards in a season? That's before we had like 95 games, so that was an actual big achievement. Loved how he would run straight up. I mean, just unbelievable vision. He had the little nose strip on. I mean, just you could. Eric Dickerson, one of the best of all time. I have him number 7. Number 6, older running back Gale Sayers. One of the first guys to really make the running back position special, where he could do a lot of things and take over a game. I know he's an older generation player, but some of his highlights, I think that guy could have still played in today's game with the talent he had. Number 5 for me was Emmitt Smith. I'm a Florida Gator fan. I can't stand the Cowboys, but I even cheered for Emmitt Smith on the Cowboys. Has multiple Super Bowls. I know that we could say he played with the best line. He played with a great quarterback. I don't care. He played and broke all the records rushing. You have to put him on the top 10. I don't know if he's above that. One of my favorite Emmitt Smith stories is when he played with like a broken shoulder. I mean, I think that epitomized who he was. He was a guy that was going to be there every Sunday and always get what was there. So Mr. Consistency, Emmitt Smith, number 5 for me. Number 4, I went with LT, LaDainian Tomlinson. I thought he was unbelievable. Him and Marshall Faulk really changed how the running back position was viewed. And they were kind of back before we started not caring about running backs anymore. They were kind of the last generation of those guys that could just take over a game, and the running game, the passing game, could do it all. And LT was unbelievable. Number 3 for me was Barry Sanders. Barry Sanders, probably the most elusive running back of all time, by for sure. Unfortunately, again, he retired early. Would have liked to have seen him continue to play. I know he got frustrated getting stuck on a team in today's NFL. This is a guy that would have held out and gone to a better team and probably had even better stats. But unbelievable watching some of his highlights. I think speaks for himself. Barry Sanders, number 3. Number 4 for me is Sweetness, Walter Payton. And the man I thought was unbelievable. Didn't look like you would think a finesse back when you watch his runs. There were some of the most brutal run over guys, run through guys, runs you'll ever see, as well as the ability to make people miss. And a lot of the stories of him, his personal life, how he was such a great person, kind of go along with that. I had Walter Payton at number 2. And showing my true age and kind of honor back to the older guys, I've got Jim Brown, probably the OG of running backs, on the Mount Rushmore at number 1.
That's a good list, and mine is very similar. I do have to, once again, there has to be an minutes here of my age. I am 35. I have not been watching football my entire life, but most of it, and I'm a Cowboy homer. So my bench, I have Gale Sayers there, and I think it was just the short career, and I don't know what his average was. He had almost 40 touchdowns. He had, I think, 39 touchdowns, right? Almost 4,000 yards or just over. So, I mean, he was nearly 1,000-yard a year rusher. But unfortunately, and you start comparing eras, he was in the run the damn football era.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the spread it out and throw it era, and we still have guys that have better stats than him. So it's just, I've never got to watch him play, and his stats to me don't scream top 10. But I do understand that he was probably a generational talent, and like you said, he kind of changed the way running backs were looked at. Bo Jackson, same thing. I think, excellent athlete, phenomenal athlete. Probably could be number 1 on this list if he just has more years. Marshawn Lynch is on my nearly there list, and it's just because what he did for, like, just opening the game back up to, like, there are some characters. You don't have to be a suit and tie wearing guy and just straight laced all. You can have fun. You can party and be a hard worker too. And by party, that's a terrible word probably, but you can just have a blast, even in the no fun league. And I think he epitomized that from college on, right? And I just love the way that he just kind of he shook up the game, but also he has some runs that are probably the best ever beyond film. Earl Campbell, I weirdly enough slid down here. I know you talked about him being in your top 10. Um, Marshall Faulk's another one. And Marshall Faulk could very easily. Oh, I lied. Earl Campbell I did put back at number 9 later. I meant to delete him off this bottom list. Marshall Faulk, I know he could be in the top 10, but unfortunately we're at that spot where there's like 15 guys that could be in the top 10. So Jerome Bettis is someone that I remember, like when you were talking about the bus, baby, right? He helped Pittsburgh finally get back to win another championship. Him and Mike Allstott are on this not quite their list because they were really fullbacks, I think. No one had the right mind to put Mike Allstott in an actual tailback position and just let him run dudes over because he was doing it so well from the fullback position. So I think they both kind of fit the same. Jerome Bettis might have been a little bit faster. Mike Allstott was he's an absolute freight train though. Thurman Thomas is a guy that I know is carried very highly in the respects for his name and what he did for the game and the way he played the game. And then Terrell Davis. Terrell Davis was kind of like where I started watching football when him and John Elway, tearing up the league and so he had to be on the list. My number 10, LaDainian Tomlinson. That is the dude. Pretty sure he played down at TCU and was fast as lightning there. And he was like that original speed back, in my opinion, catching the ball out of the backfield and just go crazy with it, right? Watching him play at the Chargers was when I was watching him play. I think he bounced around a little bit. But
and I think he might be I'm looking here. He might be San Diego State, or was he TCU?
I thought it was
TCU. You're right. Yeah, you're right. Okay.
But yeah, he just to me was like the original scat back. Maybe there was a break there between Barry Sanders and him. Like, yeah, I don't know. Just getting the ball out of the backfield like he did, in the past game, I think just it changed the dynamics of the running back position. I do have Earl Campbell at number 9 for all the same reasons you said. Just an absolute stud. Herschel Walker, because he started as a Cowboy, is probably why he's on this list. But also, just an amazing player. And that whole generation, like there was that. We talk about the best generation of men because they went and fought the war and World War II, and no one complained, and blah 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 blah. Right? I say blah 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 because I'm in the Army, and so we talk about that stuff way too much. But like he kind of I feel like was in that best generation of running backs. Like every monster on the field was playing running back and just tearing it up, and it worked great. Now maybe we've changed too much. Maybe we've gotten back too much to the little guy, and now we can't pay him enough. I don't know. Tony Dorsett, 100% Cowboys homer pick. Mm-hmm. But I don't think I'm sure he's on a lot of people's top 10 lists. Like the guy could get it. Eric Dickerson, and I'll tell you what, Eric Dickerson is because of the glasses. I know he did great things, and I've watched some documentaries and stuff with him and watched what he could do. But there's just something about those funky sports glasses. Boy, if he turned and got the eyes on you, you're in trouble. Walter Payton, oh sweetness, got him here as well. A little bit lower than yours. Jim Brown, I know you have it number 1, and that is a pretty consensus pick, as a lot of people have him at like the best to ever do it. 3, I've got Adrian Peterson, and it is not a homer pick. He obviously came from the Sooners, which is my college team, and unfortunately came from that terrible state of Texas before that. But anybody who can step into any field, and it's not like he was on a great team. The Vikings weren't great when he went there. That's why he went there, right? And he still has, and I'm sure he still holds it, the most rushing yards in a single game.
297.
Right. He was 2 yards off of breaking a season career or a season record, 2 or 3 or 5 maybe. I don't know. I remember him getting tackled and the time is running out, and they're like, well, there it goes. 99 touchdowns in the league in a quite short, not as short as some of these guys, career. I would love to see him get picked up again. I think he tried out for the Titans last year, right? They picked him up and he didn't make the cut. They cut him like a week later or something. So obviously there's some ages taken over there, but I have him at number 3, and it's only behind the greatest 2 to ever do it. 2 is Barry Sanders, and that hurts me because I am a Sooners fan, which means the Cowboys have got one up. That'd be the Oklahoma State Cowboys. But man, just watching him with the ball in his hands, and he just makes grown men look stupid. Just putting them on ice skates on a football field, and had the speed to get away from them, had the quickness. Um, just an absolute complete player. I love that he's still so much in the media too. You know, they do the Heisman House, and it's so cool to see him still just kicking it. That's great. And my number one overall is Emmitt Smith. I grew up kind of a Gators fan, but I was really a Gators fan because of Emmitt Smith. And then watching them win what was it, 3 out of 4 or whatever in the '90s when the Cowboys, win those Super Bowls. Um, and I feel like it kind of started once they drafted him. I'm pretty sure he was a class of '91, if I'm not mistaken. He got drafted to the Cowboys. It might have been the '90. I can't remember exactly, but man, he just came in the league and just immediately went to work and shaking things up. And I absolutely pay some credit where credit's due with that ability to extend a career. It wasn't like he took years off and had, oh, I'm going to sit out some games like the LeBron factor, right? I'm going to play half the games and look really good and then try to go deep in the playoffs. Nah, he was still out there every game and somehow managed to extend his career to, career rushing touchdowns, career rushing yards. I'm sure there's some more. He has a ton of freaking career records, and I think that you have to pay credit that. And when we start talking about the best to ever do it, not only would he cook you on Sunday, but he would cook you every Sunday, and then he'd do that for 15 years. So, what's better than that? Like a guy who can come out for 4 seasons and get half as many touchdowns. I don't know. So, Emmitt Smith has always been my number one, and I did grow up a Dallas Cowboys fan. So watching him on Sundays was a lot of fun. I'm very glad he played the game, and I like to see what he does. That these days he's still kind of giving back. So it's a great guy and number one on my list. All right, Coach, that takes us to our what not to do as a coach section. So why don't you teach us today's lesson, good sir?
Yeah, today's lesson on what not to do as a head coach is think that being simple means that you have to water down your playbook. And I hope that we've done a good job tonight or today, whenever you're listening to this, talking about how you can run RPOs that are run at the NFL level, and you can read multiple guys on the defense, and you can read multiple guys with multiple receivers, but you can still keep it simple. And that's the goal of a coach, is to keep things as simple as you can for your players without sacrificing the ability to have built-in answers for your offense. I think a lot of times when people hear me talk about keeping things simple, keeping verbiage short, they think that means having a very small playbook. And that's not really the truth. The truth is, if you'll teach in concepts, and I wrote a whole book on this, Daniel, Coaching Football Like a Basketball Coach. If you'll teach in concepts, then your players are able to do more than you think they are, but it feels simple and easy to them. So when you think about having a simple offense or defense, the reality is it's simple for your players, that they're able to pick up on things and you're able to kind of handle things as a coach, because you know the overall picture of what you're looking for. So don't think that when we say keep things simple, we're saying keep things generic or easy or anything like that. You can be pretty complex with how you attack a defense using really simple terms and really simple concepts. And so that's what I want today's lesson to be about.
Absolutely. All right. So one more time, Coach, why don't you tell us how to simplify football for ourselves, our staff, and our players?
Sure. Coaching 101 podcast is sponsored by Findaway Productions, which also sponsors fbcoachsimpson.com. Find all things for all types of coaching over at fbcoachsimpson.com, including the full gun tee system. We just spent a lot of time talking about RPO game. There's a ton of RPO materials over there. There's offensive materials, there's defensive materials, there's head coaching materials, there's books, digital downloads, videos, free materials like the Headsets magazine, which is all free. And so there's a lot of materials over there at fbcoachsimpson.com. Findaway Productions also sponsors offensivecoordinatoracademy.com. All things offense from the full academy. It'd be great to go through during the year and reference back to as you have issues. We've got courses from Noel Mazzoni talking about his RPO game. We've got courses on offensive line play. We've got courses on receiver play, all kinds of things offense. Is a great material for you to reference this year as you may be having issues as you work through this season over at offensivecoordinatoracademy.com. Also, defensivecoordinatoracademy.com, all things defense. If you listen to this whole episode, but you coach defense, go over to defensivecoordinatoracademy.com, find any material that you want that focuses on defense. Some of our new materials that I really want to highlight, because I think they'd be great for coaches, are our weekly planners. We have a head coach weekly planner, a offensive coordinator weekly planner, a defensive coordinator weekly planner. All those can be found at fbcoachsimpson.com. They're literally templates designed the exact way that I break down a team. The head coach one is a lot of organizational stuff, but it's a really good, simple material to keep you on task, keep you time oriented, where you're not wasting time doing things you don't need to, but make sure you're not missing things you need to get done. So you have all three planners: the offensive coordinator planner, defensive coordinator planner, head coaching planner, all over at fbcoachsimpson.com.
Awesome, Coach. On social media, you can find me on Twitter at CoachChamboOK. You can email me at any time at chamberlainfootballconsulting@gmail.com. Chamberlain is Wilt the Stilt. Google him. You'll find my last name. Put it in front of footballconsulting@gmail.com. Where can we find you on social media?
All things FB Coach Simpson. So you can go at FB Coach Simpson on Twitter, or whatever the new app is called now, X. I don't know what it is. You can find me in the Facebook groups. We've got groups of everything football. So if you want to learn something football, there's a group for it. We're trying to be involved in that. You can find me on email at fbcoachsimpson@gmail.com. Or, of course, any of those websites will respond.
Awesome. The podcast is at Coaching 101 Pod on Twitter/X. We want to thank you for being a listener to the Coaching 101 podcast. We hope you'll join us next week as we continue to make the complex more simple. Please consider subscribing to the show so you'll always know when the new episodes are out. We'll leave you with this. It's hard to beat someone who never gives up. No matter the situation, find a way.